The island of Oahu has all kinds of infrastructure challenges, and today we have an expert who's going to talk with us about some of the solutions we have and what our city can be facing in terms of cost. Dr. Wendell Cox, I want to welcome you to the show.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Sure. Tell me a little bit about yourself. What is your background and how did you get to be such an expert in infrastructure?
Well, I was appointed to 3 terms on the Los Angeles County Transportation Commission, which was over all the highways and transit in LA. I've spent 9 years as a visiting professor at the largest national university in France and have been a consultant now for 25 years in basically transportation, urban policy, demographics, all sorts of things along those lines.
And so you run a website called Demographia.
Right.
And you have your own consulting business as well, right?
That's right.
So I've seen many of your editorials over the years, your papers and so on, talking about infrastructure across the country, not just Hawaii, although you have tackled issues. What are some of the big issues that the nation is facing in terms of infrastructure?
Well, I think there's even a broader context. It talks about the world. I mean, think about the fact that Europe is on the way down, may not survive in its current form. We have the Chinese economy. We have all sorts of things combined with the worst economic decline in 80 years that has happened in this country. And so we have very serious financial problems at the government level all over the world and, of course, throughout the United States and, of course, the state of Hawaii.
So in terms of Hawaii, you've been here and you've been you've written about Hawaii before and been able to meet with some people while you're here. So what is some of the things that have stuck out in your mind when you've reviewed what's happening here in Hawaii?
Well, one of the first things, and this is happening in most states in any event, is the condition of the public employee pension funds. You're in a situation at the moment where the state and local government employee pension fund system that's handled out of the state is at about a $10,000 unfunded liability per household in the state. That's increased by $4,000 in 4 years. Then you look at the city and county of Honolulu, and the retiree health benefits per household have gone up about $2,000 in terms of unfunded liabilities. So that is the real problem, and there's no easy way to fix that. There are all sorts of things in the long run that could make that worse.
I know we write about all these things in Hawaii Reporter, and I'm so impressed that you know about it already. You've been studying our issues. We are one of the worst in the nation in terms of unfunded liabilities.
Well, the point is that it is a very serious issue. It cannot be fixed politically. The actuaries for the state of Hawaii have indicated that it's likely you're going to have to increase payments in the long run. There are all sorts of demographic reasons why that's a problem. So I think anything you talk about in terms of the infrastructure in the city and county of Honolulu has to be thought about in terms of the broader context, not only of the world economy, but also of the things that are going on in the state.
And one issue we face too is taxes. We already have among the highest taxes in the nation. We have among the highest cost of living. So when we look at where's the money going to come from, it always comes from the taxpayers, but how much more can the taxpayers afford? And that's one issue we tackle a lot.
That's a good question. I mean, you're the 8th worst taxation in the country per capita. You have the 5th highest cost of living of the top 60 cities in the country. You have the worst housing affordability of any major city in the country. So you have all sorts of problems that make it suggest that I think that it's going to be very difficult for the people of Honolulu to continue to have a good lifestyle and pay for all of these things.
It's true. Now talk to me about some of the issues you've seen with our infrastructure.
Well, very obviously there's the consent decree with respect to the wastewater treatment or the sewer problem. You may recall that Mayor Hanneman, when he was mayor, suggested that the sewer rates could go up to $300 per household. You still have no idea what that's going to cost you in the long run. Infrastructure costs can go up significantly. You saw, I think it was last week or maybe a few weeks ago, the Water Authority of the city of Honolulu saying that we're going to have to raise water rates 70% in 5 years. Who knows if that's going to be enough? You may need to raise them further. So you have very serious infrastructure issues that are absolutely necessary to be addressed.
Now, one of our favorite topics is the fact that we have a water main break almost every day. I think it's an average of 364 a year. And so that is definitely one reason that the water department is trying to raise the cost of the water. But you know, we have to wonder, what have they been doing with the money all this time? I guess that's one question we'll have to continue to ask them. But there's an issue right now with the city and county thinking about taking over the Board of Water Supply, because it is a semi-autonomous, you know, partly private, partly government agency, which is always, you know, can create a problem of who's responsible.
Well, that's a good question. I'm really not an expert in that. That is to say, I have not looked at that with respect to the city and county of Honolulu, but it ought to be looked at very closely. I mean, I've got to tell you that looking around the country at government reorganizations, they're all going to save money at the front end when we study them, and they never do in the long run. So I would only urge great caution in anything you do with respect to those kinds of reorganizations.
Now, in terms of this consent decree, we're talking specifically about the EPA, which is the Environmental Protection Agency, putting a mandate on Honolulu to change the way to fix our sewer system, because it's been so poor for so long, and upgrade it in certain areas, Sand Island treatment. Have you seen that in other states where the EPA actually has to step in and order upgrades like that, or is Hawaii unique?
No, it's happened in other places as well, but I think it's pretty, what's happened here may be unique, and clearly it needs to be looked at. I mean, you think about what's the difference between Manila and Honolulu, and Manila is a wonderful place, but you know, big problem in Manila is the fact that the sewage is not sufficiently treated. This is something that a first world city cannot allow to continue to happen, and you've got to deal with it.
Especially when we rely on tourism.
Exactly.
And we keep claiming to be such a healthy city. So.
Right.
Okay, so what else have you seen in terms of Oahu and the infrastructure issues that you've encountered while you're here?
Well, I think one of the things you've got to think about when you think about debt and infrastructure, and these are all very expensive in an environment where the cost of living is high, the taxes are high, and the cost of housing is high, is you should only spend money on those things that you really need. And I think a classic example at this point is the rail program that supposedly is going to cost $5 billion. I expect it'll cost more like $7 billion. It will not do a thing to improve traffic congestion, and yet you have the second or first worst traffic congestion problem in the country here. And I guess what I would argue is, in these very uncertain financial times that we see no easy way out of, the last thing we should be doing is investing in a program that is not going to give us something significant. It is something you don't need.
And we're specifically talking about the elevated steel-on-steel rail system that's going to run from Kapolei to Honolulu. It's a planned system. It hasn't received all of its final approvals. And of course, there's a lawsuit challenging the rail if that's really the best solution for Oahu. We have a lot of citizens that are not happy with the choice of the steel-on-steel elevated rail system. So we've talked about that a lot on the show. But in general, what is the difference in terms of the rail solution versus what you've seen work in other cities?
Well, first of all, you must recognize that 95% approximately of all travel on Oahu is by car. People of Oahu are concerned about traffic congestion. It's one of the big issues in polls here. If you want to reduce traffic congestion, and you need to, it is terrible here and it is hurting your economy. If you want to reduce traffic congestion, you must get the traffic moving. There is no other way. There are no other solutions. And so you've got to find ways to do that. There are any number of ways you can do that, from things like trying to encourage telecommuting, which is expanding in a number of cities on the mainland by large amounts, or whether it's doing things to make traffic move faster, like they've done in Tampa with this marvelous toll elevated highway that has done a lot to reduce congestion. The point is, you cannot in the long run expect to grow economically in this situation, especially if you don't seriously address this traffic congestion problem.
Now, in terms of our specific rail, I don't know if you've had a chance to look at the actual rail and how it's supposed to be set up. What were your thoughts on the fact that it's an elevated steel-on-steel rail system in Hawaii and an island situation on Oahu? What struck you about it when you got to look at it?
Well, first of all, I was surprised to hear that it was elevated. For $5 billion, you should get 20 miles underground. Okay, first of all, it's hideously expensive. It has been growing in cost very much, but I think it is very important in the long run not to simply argue that it would be better to do something else. There's no question. Building light rail for a third the cost would be better. But that wouldn't get at the traffic congestion problem either. But the problem is, you're spending at least $3.5 billion more than you need to build this thing. And the other thing, of course, is this is a land development project. Why are we building this out into virgin agricultural territory? The last half of the system hardly has any density at all. We're not talking about something that is really needed in the long run. If this were 1965 or 1985 and people in Hawaii had all the money in the world and wanted to do neat things, this might be something worth doing. It is now the 2010s and things are radically changed. It is not business as usual.
Now, when we look at in terms of energy efficiency, a lot of times we hear people saying, oh, the rail's a lot more energy efficient, or it's better for the environment. I hear that from environmentalists all the time. What is, and then of course there's the other environmentalists that say they realize that the rail is going to cause a lot of problems and take a lot of energy and so on. But what about your studies? What have you seen in terms of that?
Well, first of all, the first thing you have to understand about rail is that in order for it to achieve any of its environmental advantages, it must take people out of cars. It must take cars off the road. It doesn't do that. So it doesn't matter if it doesn't even use any energy at all. It's irrelevant. Mm-hmm. That's the basic problem. We did a report here, a study of the system, basically looked at the greenhouse gas emissions implications of the rail system and found that they were negative or almost or made no difference whatsoever. And when you compare the tons of greenhouse gas emissions that are removed by the rail system, many, many times the international IPCC standard. So, I mean, the point is you cannot reduce energy consumption or greenhouse gases with a system that doesn't get people out of cars.
Right. One of the things that Cliff Slater points out on a regular basis, he's of course with HonoluluTraffic.com, he's one of the lead plaintiffs in the lawsuit against the rail, is that the city actually says it's not going to reduce traffic. And can you elaborate that on a little bit? Well,
the fact is that rail doesn't reduce traffic. You can take Washington, D.C., which has built more new rail than any city in the United States. If you look at the downtown traffic counts, what you find is that, yes, something like 60,000 people have moved from cars to the train. But you know what? 55,000 of those were passengers in carpools. We do not gain by taking passengers out of cars. We gain by taking cars off the road. And the basic problem is, for a whole range of reasons, rail does not reduce traffic congestion. It hasn't anywhere.
So in terms of other cities and what you see, do you see the same kind of tensions where you have the rail opponents and the rail advocates fighting it out? And do you have, construction groups? And I mean, is it the same kind of thing here where you have the unions and the construction groups on one side and then the public or the environmentalists on the other? How is it playing out in other cities?
Well, there are similar situations. I would say, however, it's been a bit unusual here, maybe partly because this is not the largest metropolitan area in the country. You're about 55th in size. You have an amazing group of people who have studied this issue and are fighting the battle, the people that are opposed to it. And oftentimes you don't have that in a lot of the cities on the mainland, the bigger cities. And I think it comes down to the fact that this system is so expensive in relation to the population. The per capita expenditures on this line are far and away the highest on any line in the country. In LA, for example, when I was involved in the development of the Los Angeles rail system, who cared if you wasted $1 billion or $2? I mean, when you've got 10 million people, it's not a big deal. The stakes are much higher here, and that's the real risk. And I would only add to that, recognize that a place of similar size, Birmingham, Alabama, recently the main county there filed bankruptcy because they couldn't pay their sewer debt. I mean, the fact is that there are all sorts of financial risks that you're faced with, and one needs to be very careful about the financial commitments that are made for the future.
In terms of our group here, I think you're right. We have a very eclectic group of people. We have, I was mentioning Cliff Slater, who's a businessman from HonoluluTraffic.com and a transportation expert. You have our former governor, Benjamin Cayetano, who's a Democrat, a former city council chair and a judge, Walter Heen. We have Randy Roth, who's a law professor at University of Hawaii. Senator Sam Sloan, who's a Republican, who runs the Small Business Hawaii Education Foundation. So, and a Dr. Michael Uichi. So, and as well as you have a lot of environmental groups getting involved, and Hawaii's Thousand Friends and the League of Women Voters. So they have become very educated in large part because of Cliff Slater and Panos Provodoris and their work over the years. So I think you're absolutely right in terms of our experts. But what in terms of challenges do you think that they have specifically with this project? How do you think people can get it across? What their message? I mean, they're working on and on of trying to get more out there to the public. But what do you think you've seen work in other cities in terms of education?
Well, first of all, I'm very pleased to see that strong environmental groups like Thousand Friends of Hawaii are in this important fight with the other side of the issue, because altogether too often you get the impression that these are opposing views. And these people do oppose one another on some issues, but I'm pleased to see that they've come together here. So the challenges, though, are going to be very difficult. I believe they really have got to make the point and convince people that there is no impact with respect to traffic congestion. And you don't just have to make charges, just look at the plans. It's not going to be there. The other issue, of course, is to make sure people understand the seriousness of the financial situation. I mean, in the 10 years from 2000 to 2010, 50,000 people left Honolulu, that is Oahu, for other parts of the country. Now, many of them went to the neighbor islands because they had a net increase in migration. But the fact is, you are losing people. Your housing is too expensive. Your taxes are too high. And you have managed one way or another to put yourself into a very poor competitive position.
You know, some of the challenges have been for the anti-rail groups is that the city has an unlimited amount of money and basically just keeps spending, and they're spending it on defense of the lawsuit. And we see them again, I think it was this week, trying to get more money to defend themselves in this lawsuit. And it's usually using taxpayer money against the taxpayers in a sense. Is this a kind of a unique situation? Or
oh, no.
No, this is going on everywhere.
This is how it works. And the sad thing about it is, I mean, there's so many things that have been put into the planning process to try to keep outcomes from being bad and so on. Really, in the long run, citizens have got to work to remove the people that are causing the problem. And you got to work hard at that. It may be impossible, but that is a real problem all across the country. You see that in California now, where Jerry Brown, for example, is pushing a high-speed rail system that costs between $98 and $118 billion. This is routine. It really has to be stopped. There are just a lot of people that do not understand that the world of the post-Great Financial Crisis is much different than the world preceding it.
So what advice do you have for Hawaii in terms of how could we fix some of our problems? We have tremendous potholes, road deterioration, infrastructure issues, and so on. What do you see as your experience from other places? What would you advise?
Well, first of all, there are some things you must do. You must deal with the sewers, you must deal with the waters, and whether you like it or not, you're going to have to pay the employee pensions, okay? Now that gets you to transportation. The one thing you do not want to do is come in and say, we need this rail system or we need this highway. What you need to do is say, how much money do we have for transportation? How much do various transportation strategies reduce the amount of traffic delay measured in hours, and how much does that cost? And you want to go from a position of identifying problems to identifying solutions to those problems, not buying some prepackaged solution that has been marketed all over the country. Billions and billions of dollars has been spent, and the first reduction in traffic congestion is yet to occur.
One of the things that we've seen is that the city has already picked the contract, have awarded the contract to Ansaldo, which is part of an Italian-based firm, and of course it's having financial trouble. What kind of do you have any knowledge of this company or any of, in general, about rail companies and how they're doing?
Well, put it this way. No, I don't know anything about Ansaldo, and I can't make any comment on any rail company or any consulting engineering company or anything like that. I can tell you that in Boston, they took a project that was to cost $4 billion, and with interest, it went to 22. I can tell you in Los Angeles, where we put together a rail program to build 10 lines of rapid transit with a half-cent sales tax, they ended up not building 6, even though they got 2 more taxes. What I'm telling you, the international evidence is very clear. These systems routinely cost much more than anticipated. They routinely carry many fewer people, and they get much less in fare revenue. And I can't tell you what's wrong, but what's going on, but I can tell you that an Oxford professor who led a European team in reviewing this over the last 80 years, infrastructure development in North America and in Europe, concluded that what you have going on is strategic misrepresentation by consultants and governments. They know if they told the truth, nobody would ever do these things. And the consultants, the academicians even went so far as to call it lying. And it's the only time I have ever seen that term used in academic literature. It is a real problem. It is an industry with a dreadful record of serving the public. And a good place to start stopping all this would be Honolulu.
That's true. So in terms of what you've seen work, can you tell me about any cities that you think are doing it right now? Whether it's whatever kind of transportation issues or they have their act together.
Well, for example, what you've seen happen in Tampa, St. Petersburg has been impressive. Last year, the voters turned down a major rail initiative that wouldn't have done anything except spend money. At the same time, they developed an elevated highway, an elevated toll highway that's done a lot to reduce traffic congestion, a toll highway that pays for itself, doesn't require a penny out of the taxpayers' pockets. The other thing that's going on in a lot of cities, some cities more than others, but not yet so much in Honolulu, is the expansion of telecommuting. Telecommuting by 2020 in this country will have more people every day using it than transit. That's how fast it's growing. And you know, the neat thing about telecommuting, it doesn't take a penny of tax, it doesn't put a bit of greenhouse gas into the air or anything like that. And I think we need to be trying to find ways to encourage companies and governments and so on to use telecommuting more. It can't do everything, but if you could, for example, move from a situation where instead of 5% of the people telecommuting, it was 10 or 15%, it would make a world of difference with respect to traffic congestion.
Now, give a little bit of background on telecommuting, what's involved and basically what it is.
Well,
go ahead.
Okay. Essentially what you've got is a situation where companies basically set employees up with their own computers in their own houses. For example, JetBlue runs its reservation system by a telecommuting system where if you call JetBlue, the agent may be in St. Louis, she or he may be in North Dakota. It is all tied together by computer. There are all sorts of situations like that around the United States where companies are doing that. You can do it with local companies that have back office operations. You can have people living anywhere on the island and doing that kind of thing. So that's a real very important hope.
You know, that could definitely help Hawaii. And another issue is people have talked about, well, can schools start later? Because we've noticed when the University of Hawaii is out of session, the traffic is fine, at least on the East Oahu side. And when schools are out of session during the summer or during spring break or Christmas, there's no traffic. So what suggestions do you have in terms of what other states might be doing? Do they make school later or earlier or anything like that?
Well, again, I think I'm not satisfied with what's going on anywhere. I mean, with respect, telecommuting is happening because it's making economic sense, and companies are doing it. And it's not because I'm not suggesting government shouldn't be encouraging it. What bothers me is here we are spending every year $35 billion in tax money on transit and $150 or $200 billion on roads. And no one is talking about telecommuting, and I'm saying there ought to be some attention there. But no, I don't think anybody's by any means got it right. I think we have got to start looking, though, at other alternatives and trying to find ways to spend the money that we have most efficiently.
In terms of the Congress, have you followed the debate on funding for rail? There's been the House versus the Senate and the battle over that, plus President Obama's agenda for rail. What do you see happening there in Congress right now?
It's hard to say. As you probably are aware, the high-speed rail program has been killed. So we're not going to see that expand. The Republican Congress has tried to zero out the New Start's urban rail programs, and those kinds of arguments are going to continue. I would only suggest that the future suggests that it is going to be harder to get this kind of money in the future than it has been in the past. And that's not just because the Republicans hold more control now than they did before. The Republicans used to support this stuff too. But the world has changed and the country has changed, and you're beginning to see Democrats coming up and recognizing that this is not very cost effective. For example, the high-speed rail program could not have been canceled without the support of Democrats in the Congress, and they were there to support it.
So what about President Obama and his agenda? He supports rail. We also have Senator Inoue, who is from Hawaii. Of course, he's the appropriations chair, promising over $1.5 billion for the system. Do you think that will ever materialize based on what you've seen? Well,
I think there are reasons to be concerned. I mean, you've got the Federal Transit Administration basically saying we have great concerns about your financial program. Recognize, first of all, that you're only going to get $1.5 billion if you get that. That means, for example, if this program goes from $5 to $7 billion, that extra $2 billion will come out of taxpayers' pockets here on Oahu. I'm not sure why people like President Obama and Senator Inouye are supporting this. But you know, we see in politics people routinely support things. Sometimes they support things we think are right, and sometimes they support things we think are wrong. I think the record is abundantly clear that rail is exceedingly expensive, and especially in this economic time, makes no sense at all. I can't justify why others take a different position, but I think it's pretty clear.
Now, in cities where you have some big populations and a smaller area, for example, Washington, D.C. or New York City, does it work? Does rail work?
Well, there's no question. First of all, recognize that probably a lot of people don't recognize that you have a fairly high population density urban area here. It's fairly high density, though I must say most of the rail route is not high density and simply does not qualify by any objective measure for having rail transit because of its low density, but that's a different issue. Recognize that all of these places we think about as being dense are dense only in the core. Now, rail clearly works in New York, but one has to recognize that New York is a pre-automobile city. Honolulu is not a pre-automobile city, not even LA is. And so what you have is a situation where the old part of the city that was built up around the rail system works very well. But in the case of New York, for example, over the last 60 years, the city itself has stayed approximately the same at 8 million people, and the suburbs have grown from 4 million people to 12 million people. And all of those people have cars. And so one has to recognize that rail does a really good job in some things. It carries 75% of the people to work south of 59th Street in Manhattan. However, rail cannot do that kind of thing unless you have those kinds of land uses. We aren't building Manhattans anymore. We're not building Parises anymore. It is a real throwback, and we need to recognize, I mean, for example, sorry for taking so long, Los Angeles, where we have built, I'm not sure, 4 or 5 lines at this point. I was present at the creation, and it was my tax amendment that created the funding, okay? In Los Angeles, they have built all these lines, spent, the last figure I saw was something like $18 billion, inflation-adjusted dollars. And you know what? Today, with 2 million more people, they carry the same number of people as they carried before the first rail line was built. So that's the issue.
And we know Hawaii is not LA, and it's not New York, and it's not Paris.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Well, we only have a few more seconds on the show. Can you give your final thoughts on the wrap up this show?
Well, I mean, I really do think you do need to take a good, hard look at the future in terms of the finances. I mean, you have some real threats in the long run. The threats that I've indicated in terms of the pensions and the sewer and all that, you don't know what the cost of those is going to be in the long run. You don't know what the cost of the rail system is going to be. So it is a really good time to step back and say, now, what is it we're trying to accomplish? If we're trying to spend money, we are going to be very successful. If we're trying to reduce traffic congestion, this is clearly something you should not be doing.
So where can people get more information about what you're writing and so on? I know you've been on Cato and all different other websites, but where can they come to find more about
the best place, I have my website, demographia.com, but I'm a weekly commentator on newgeography.com, and you'll find me there every week.
All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Cox, for coming on the show today. Glad that you could be here to share more about Oahu and our infrastructure issues. Thank you for joining us. This has been News Behind the News. Aloha.